Hello guys, Matt Lemke here through Gamer Goggles, gamer-goggles.com, and today we're going to take a look at Dungeons Dragons Art and Arcana, a visual history by Michael Witmer, Kyle Newman, Jon Petersen, and Sam Witmer. Be right back. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that I want to share, so bear with me. Please stay through the whole thing. At the very end, I'll separate myself and you'll get to see my pretty face, and I'll talk about why I like, dislike, don't like, what I think they could have done different of the book. The book is quite thick. Let's put this in perspective. What do I have here? So, okay, we have, there we go. That is a 1x1 square that I use for Dungeons and Dragons when I make stuff. It's from a Hearst Arts mold, so those of you that are familiar with Hearst Arts get an idea of how thick the binding is. You open up the book. Inside the cover, they got this nice dark page here of a map, and this is the village of Hamlet. So this is from the Temple of Elemental Evil, or I think the village of Hamlet was in the second set of the second module, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've done that. One of the things I want to point out is that this is a stitched binding. I wish that Wizards of the Coast would use this on all of the big rule books. It's just a much better quality. Now the book is I think $50 retail. I'm not sure off the top of my head. And then there's also a collector's edition that is $150, and I'll have links to those in the description, so you can go find them in places if you haven't already found them at your local store, or if your local store can't get them, because right now this book is pretty difficult to get right around the holidays. And one thing about this book too is it's heavy. So this is a coffee table book. This is the type of book that you drop on your coffee table, you let your guests look at it, and they know immediately the kind of things you're into. That is, if you have guests over for coffee. Could be a beer table book. Anyway, so it is a visual history. And where is it? I thought there was something right here at the beginning I wanted you to read. Well, first off, very first thing is the table of contents, and basically you have Detect Magic, which is how to read this book. Brilliant play on the Detect Magic spell, in my opinion. Then they've got Pyrotechnics, the fire that started it all. Explosive Runes, The Troubled Times of 1983, Polymorph Self, basically turning first edition D&D into second edition. Then they have The Fall of TSR, followed by third edition and 3.5, which I think they quite possibly could have wound into one because they were so closely related. But I'm actually very happy with the way they laid out the book. Maze for 4th edition, and then Wish is 5th edition, along with acknowledgments, credits, and an index. So the introduction. Well, the next page, actually, there's a foreword by Joe Magniello, which he was recently just on. Shoot, I don't remember the show. I'll try and find the video and post it on my Facebook page. So make sure you check that out. And then the introduction basically talks about how D&D back in the day wasn't a cool thing to do. And then it moves into, well, we have this really neat, I'm going to have to zoom back out for this now because this is a huge book. So let's put this in perspective. Here's a clipboard with a lot of my notes on it. The clipboard is about the same size of one page, not one notebook page. So just so you're aware of that. And one of the coolest things about this book is there's going to be, for many people, a lot of never before seen material, just because of the age of it. But on top of that, even if you are a huge D&D fan, there's a ton, well, I don't know about a ton, but there's a lot of material that has not been released before this book in here. And I wish I could go ahead and point it out. I just know that that is one of the cases. Because I have talked with some of the people that were involved with it at various different conventions, and in the course of conversation that came up. But one of the things that I think is cool is you get this retro, well, not retro, but you get this kind of contrast of where Dungeons and Dragons was, kids playing around in their house with their local buddies, to being able to play in a full-fledged studio. It talks a lot about the maturity to me. I really like that picture. Now, read this, or Read Magic, or Detect Magic is what it was titled, but now they have it as Read Magic. This is all about the different types of sections, and we're going to go through here and we're going to talk about some of them. I have them outlined. I have actually all my tabs pretty much outlined until the end. I'm going to try and get through this in 16 minutes. I doubt that's going to happen. This book is like 500 pages, 450. If I remember correctly, it's like 448. 440 pages. And for $50, that is probably quite a steal if you're into Dungeons and Dragons. So we have the story, which basically any page that has text on it like this, this is where the story of Dungeons and Dragons history is being told. Then we have archaeology, which is going to be section 2 here. No, that's not archaeology. I put that in the wrong spot. They're all labeled, and I will come back to archaeology. Artist favorite. We're going to just touch upon that a couple different times as we go through the book. Deadliest Dungeons. I really didn't do anything with Deadliest Dungeons because we're going to talk about the Tomb of Horrors stuff that's in this book a little bit. It's one of the highlights. And I think no matter where you go, you can't get away from Tomb of Horror because it's one of the fundamental dungeons of Dungeons and Dragons. And then we have Evolution, which is monster stuff, and we'll go do that right now for archaeology. So we have, this is a 2-page foldout, and it is Strange Inspirations. And in this case, it's Doctor Strange and how they got some of the inspirations for some of the Dungeons and Dragons art, right down to Nick Fury, Bell's Barbarian. Bell's sword came from how he was holding his pistol in Marvel Comics. Great stuff. And that's some of the stuff that I didn't know personally. I mean, I kind of assumed that some of the inspiration came from other fantasy sources, but I've never seen anything so detailed with it. Many Faces. Many Faces is going to be different styles of what certain iconic characters or arcanic monsters have grown into in Dungeons and Dragons. So this one actually takes a good look at Loth, the Spider Queen. And she started off in 1978 as, well, something that you would expect to see on animated cartoons from 1978, all the way up through the maturity of what she is in 2008, which is much more, I don't want to say graphic, because graphic can be interpreted as you know, too adult, but more detailed. Graphic in that sense. And then we have Sundry Lore, which, you know, I don't think I actually labeled that, but it is basically all the different types of tables and charts, and how the story is what it is. So now we're just going to start flipping through. And, oh, I guess I lied. The Read Magic section wasn't part of Detect Magic. But you can see some of the beautiful things here, like the original brown cover books of the releases. And I have only ever seen one of these books in my life. I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I think in '86. I was in 3rd grade. I played, the first time I ever played, I played with my brother. And he didn't really get me hooked, but then a kid down the street invited me down the street to play. He did a practice run of Caves of Chaos for some other friends that were coming over. I was a guinea pig, and I kind of got hooked. So I ended up buying everything, and I started playing. But one of the first sections is that, to me, is a personal favorite because Dungeons and Dragons actually grew out of the Little Wars idea, which, for those of you that don't know, Little Wars is one of the very, very, very first miniature games ever made, if not the first. I suppose, you know, there might be some game that was out there that we don't have a history of, or that we haven't discovered yet, and that's why I'm saying it that way. But it talks about that portion of the history, and how Gary Gygax wrote Chainmail with Jeff Perrin. Again, a nice brown cover book, and I would love to have these copies, personally. And then you can start to see again the different phases of how art worked. And then he talks about supplementing fantasy. And then you can see, you know, drawings, the original type text. I mean, I remember having a printer like this. and things of that nature. And again, you can see, you know, how art has matured. Even in this older school art, you can see certain levels of maturity. And then again, they come back and they start talking about different forms of inspiration and where they got their ideas. You can see some of the original ads that were ever out there. Now here's an evolution, which I don't think we talked about yet, because I have another one here. Yeah, it's right here actually. The one that I wanted to share with you wasn't the Purple Worm, it's the Mind Flayer, because I really think the Mind Flayer did a wonderful job of maturing over the years. I mean, so did the Purple Worm. I honestly think that my favorite Purple Worm is the one from the 70s, the late 70s. But the Mind Flayer, I mean, you started off with this kind of cheesy character, and you went to what pretty much gave him the idea and maintained what he is forever and ever. But then as society and our intelligence matured, and we learned more about how people may have or could have dressed, and our understanding of armor and things matured, we went to these guys. And I actually think I'm kind of torn between which of those two is my favorite. But I do love how we've matured into making them more than this sorcerer type of character. And we're already 12 minutes in. So I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Here on, I don't know what page it is, but Tomb of Horrors. Now all this stuff here on Tomb of Horrors is actually pretty much the original stuff as it was presented at the very first convention. Here's the original art. This is not the stuff that was published in the, well, some of it might have been published, but some of these hand-drawn sketches and things did not make it into print. And then here you have their actual handwriting pieces of notebook paper. You can see outdoor survival game. And then, am I on 8? I am on 8. You can start to see now with 8 the devil in the details. So this is actually part of, I think, where they have their fall. Here's some great representations of the original cover arts and things of that nature. But the devil is in the details. This is where it talks about the historic suicide that was supposedly associated in Dungeons and Dragons got the blame for. And that happened in the late 70s. August 1979, 16-year-old Michigan State University computer science student. So one, the kid was super smart already, disappeared from campus during summer term. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all of this. But there were a lot of things that happened in here. If you have any inkling to find out a lot of the details about it, there's a lot of history here. You can also read some of the publications by Mike Stackpole. I do not remember the name of the publications. I'll have to look those up for you. Or you can just contact Mike directly. I'm sure he'll answer questions about anything he's written. And you can see other things here. So here is one of the artist's favorites. This is one of the artists. This artist actually picked that as one of his favorite pieces in Dungeons and Dragons. You can also see how they raced the edge, especially for back in the 70s, of controversy and how they got into conflict with, you know, the Bible Belt, we'll say. But you can see how the art was also a little bit, a lot more cartoony. And as we move through here, we are going through, well, we just hit her. I marked this just because it's one of my favorite maps of all times. It's Caves of Chaos map. And I remember, I have so many stories of this map. I used it for Caves of Chaos. About early 2000, they did their 30th year anniversary. I owned a game store. I had people come in that I didn't expect were going to come in, and I used this map. It was the only map I had in the store because I didn't have any of my D&D books with me. I didn't expect anybody to show up for it because in 2.5 years of being open, I never sold one book for Dungeons and Dragons. Don't know why. They were going to Dalton or whatever, Walden Books, but I never sold one. I used this map over and over and over to tell different stories that weekend. So it has a fond place in my heart. It saved my butt. It made me a lot of new friends. And then Golden Age of Adventuring. Here's some of the covers over time. And later on we might stop and see Ravenloft. And I think that is my favorite rendition of that character. Barrier Peaks. Wow. Some great adventures here that I haven't played in years and years. Against the Giants. How beautiful. I'm trying to keep a timeline here for you guys, but this is bringing back so many memories that in some ways I just want to cry because I had most of this stuff in my time, and I never had that guy, sadly, the original box set. And why did I make this? Heavy metal. So one of the reasons why I marked this is just because Dungeons and Dragons was one of the first role-playing games. I mean, it was really the first role-playing game to do anything with miniatures. And I'm a miniatures guy. I play a lot of miniature games, and I just wanted to point out the miniatures do not look like that anymore. And if you get these old miniature guys, be careful because they do have lead in them. So wear gloves. Don't touch them with your skin. Avoid that at as many costs as you can. And then, they talk about, like, before the crash and stuff, how Dungeons and Dragons was everywhere. They had all kinds of different licenses coming up, and I actually had this game as a kid. And it was quite addicting. I had the board for that because I found it somewhere, and I never had the pieces, but I had the board. And then we're gonna jump up ahead a little bit. We're gonna flip through some more stuff. Here is the red box cover that was renditioned by Larry Elmore. This is a beautiful cover. It's probably one of my favorite D&D box covers of all time. There it is again. And as we move on, you're gonna start to see, like, these are all toys. I bought most of these toys as a kid. I was really big into action figures. I owned most of these. In fact, I still have that Zarek Assassin somewhere floating around in this house. Unless my kids donated them. But I know that when my children were younger, they had him to use. And moving on, I mean, you could see where they had licensing all over the place. They had record players. They had Viewfinder. I had all of those. Action figure art, comic books. I did buy the comic book. That was probably actually, Dungeons and Dragons is probably what actually made me a comic book fan. I don't collect anymore. I don't have that kind of money. And then, of course, the cartoon, which this is something that I'm going to pick up here in the next future. I'm pretty sure that you can find that on Amazon. And if I can find it on Amazon, I'll put a link in the description. In fact, I better make a note of that now. D&D cartoon link. And then we see some of the art of Jeff Easley. I believe this was an Easley cover. Let me double check here. I believe it was an Easley cover. But this era right here, the dawn of these covers for the rebirth of first edition to the second edition game, these were my favorite covers of all time. In fact, I wish D&D still had this art. It's super dynamic. I mean, the art now is good, but there is just something so magical about the art like this. Especially like, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. And then we're talking about Dragonlance. Dragonlance is probably what really got me into Dungeons & Dragons. I read the Dragonlance novels for school to write reports on. And I actually love this. It looks like it was originally done on tracing paper. and then brought over and put into color. And in some ways, I like the black and white better than I like the color version of Larry Elmore's work here. And you can see little things like this all the time, all over the place. You can see here's the Dragonlance Chronicles and the different books, and well, we won't get too much into that. Again, another side-by-side of black and white sketch to color, and in some ways I like this better, but when you get down to adding the ground, the color is just sets it apart. Again, another black and white sketch gone to color. More Dragonlance stuff, all the different modules, which at one point in time I actually did own all of those. I didn't play a lot of modules in my time, and I still don't. I just don't like them. I think they're too story hitched, and they don't have enough freedom. Again, we're back into some of those covers that I was saying I love. This was Unearthed Arcana, I believe, Oriental Adventures, Legends and Lore, and another great piece of work here, art. The Wilderness Survival Guide, some more maps, and we start talking about Temple of Elemental Evil, and we move through. This is actually a really, really good section. Another, I was already here. My bad. Manual of the Plains. That was a great cover. But there's some, you can actually take this and write a story about it. You can't do that about every piece of art or every cover that is currently out with Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think. And I think the fact that we're storytellers, this is what we want to see, or it's what I want to see. Then, well, more art and stuff. So we're going to come here to this small section. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this section, but more of the Sundry lore. This is all stuff about Gen Con, pretty much, for the next few pages, and then we start busting out into the 3rd edition stuff, and I'm not gonna, well, there we go. Hey, look at that. That's Peter Adkinson. I really loved, I didn't care for the covers in 3rd edition and 3.5, but this stuff, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I could do what the covers could stay as long as they keep this art, and I wish they would bring stuff back like this, because it gave a flavor of depth to the game. It looks more, I guess educated is the right word. And again here, I loved this. You can see the progression of 2 characters. The Ranger went from the bow in hand to bow on back with 2 blades. The Dwarf went from a caster to probably a cleric or a warrior, and the monk went from 2-bladed weapons to 2-stick weapons. Archaeology. Here we go. I found it. So the archaeology I wanted to talk about is the Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition dragons, and basically it shows you the whole concept behind them. It gives you a brief description of what Lockwood and Sam Wood did and what their approach was. And then just another piece of art from 3rd edition. And the reason why I picked this is actually from the original 1st edition. I think this is in the player's handbook, and then this is the player's handbook. And you can see how the art has gone from a softer comic booky, cartoony to a more detailed work of what we expected in society of what these creatures looked like. Creatures. I call them creatures. And then probably my favorite campaign setting of Dungeons and Dragons, Eberron. So I really cannot talk about D&D without talking about Eberron, especially the history of this book. Keith Baker did a great job with this world, and then Wayne Reynolds has his artist favorite here, and some of the art that Wayne has done. I mean, you're all familiar with Wayne and where he's gone to and what he's become. And then you just see some more 3.5 stuff and 3.0, and then we get into a lot more things like pretending to be an elf, older art, things of that nature before we move into 4th edition. You can see right away the art changed a little bit. It went back. It's still kind of dynamic, but it's not. It doesn't tell the same story for me that the earlier art did way back from around the change of 1st edition to 2nd edition. And then that pretty much sums it up. It does a lot of different things. I'll just flip through some more of this for you to see, so you get an idea. There is a lot of art in here. This is a great tool for GMs too. You can, well, right here, just for example, with an evolution, you can actually make different versions of owl bears now in your world. They'd be like, hey, this is the owl bear you see, and what's it do? So you got different variants. Some, pictures. A look back on Dungeons and Dragons when they re-released some of the things, like as collector's editions. And Chevy Chase. Where is it? Right, no. Greendale Community College student Price Hawthorne. And I just highlighted that so that people would see that lots of people from all walks of life play Dungeons and Dragons or do things with Dungeons and Dragons. And now we're into some of the things like the different board games, tabletop games that have been licensed for D&D. And then 5th edition, which most of us are probably familiar of. We don't need to spend a lot of time in here looking at this. But here you go. Here's Strahd, the different faces of Strahd, and I'm not a fan of that. That's too Hollywood, and I'm not really a fan of those. That is probably my favorite, followed by the most recent rendition. And then, well, that's really about it. It starts talking about things like Volo's Guide to Monsters, and how they're merging they're blasting into the past with 5th edition and bringing it up to a more modern type of setting and revisiting a lot of the campaign stuff. And this, my gosh, I haven't seen this in ages. Well, I'm not going to take the time to switch back and forth, switch cameras. Last thing I want to share, besides my opinion, is you can see the differences of covers through the course of time. Let me do that there a little bit. So you've got the originals, then what we would call AD&D. AD&D, I'll call it 1.5, and then these are really the more traditional 2nd edition stuff. One of these, I don't remember which, I actually bought some of the blue covers, and they were identical to the other cover. And I can't remember the order. If you guys want to really know, I can figure it out for you. All the way up to 3.0 and 3.5. You can see the subtle differences. And then 4th edition had a very different look, and 5th edition has a very different look. I really do miss these. Somewhere in here there's a picture with 3 covers. Oh, right there's the Monster Manual. Probably one of the most dynamic covers in all of role-playing. Anyway, so then you've got your acknowledgments and credits and all that fun stuff, and there's even an index for, I didn't know Vallejo did stuff, for doing stuff. So what do I think of this book? Well, it's $50, and if you're going to buy a book on the history of Dungeons and Dragons, this is probably worth double that for the amount of content that's in here and the way it's written. It's certainly a $50 price tag. You get a rule book for half this thickness, and it's the same price. I mean, there's no rules, obviously, but if you want the lore and you want something to learn more about Dungeons and Dragons or share with different people, this book is absolutely amazing. It weighs a ton. It's well made. There are only a couple of things that I would gripe about, and this is actually a good example that I opened to. I understand why they did this, and this was actually. I will be right back. And I understand wholeheartedly why they did this. So to put it in perspective, well, here's one of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons covers that I love. But here's the cover that you're looking at. So you've got this section here, boom, but then you've got the back. And that's exactly what they did, is they put it on here and they opened it up. But what I don't like about it is the binding splits the art and makes it harder to read than it has to be in certain points of the book. Like they did it up front with the Tomb of Horror stuff. That is really the only thing I could pick on them about. Other than that, the cover, I mean, it's a solid cover. The only other thing I wish it had, being a book of this size, is I wish it had a book sleeve that you could put over it that had the art or more art on the back side of it to protect it more. But that's it, man. Beautiful book. If you want to know about the history of D&D, or if you just aren't a fan of the art, you could not buy. If you bought these prints at 8.5 by 11, each and every one of these would cost you $10 to $25. So just for the art alone, the book is well over $150. Anyway, guys, I have taken enough of your time. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. If you want to buy this book, there will be a link below to places where you can find it. Thanks for talking. Later. Hi, guys. Meet the Nibbles, who's gonna go down. She just decided not to go down my back, so we'll do this for her so she's comfy. Thanks for watching my video, and I appreciate it. Please hit the like button and share it if you know somebody who might be interested. And of course, there's always Twitter and the Facebook thingy, and soon I have a newsletter coming. That'll be down there or in the link below, and my kitty cat loves that idea. So anyway, there was one more thing. Oh yeah, subscribe. Be a part of my community, our community. Let's make it grow together. See you guys at a con somewhere, or a local store, or if I'm driving through the country, maybe a game club. I don't know, you're not going to go knock down my camera. Bye, guys.